What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. So let's go over a brief introduction to crafting and upgrading your gear, as well as using the trade market in Torchlight Infinite. This is going to be also kind of a mid-progression build guide for my character, but I'll also show you guys how to increase your DPS. So one thing that's really important as you just basically finish off the campaign, there are going to be a bunch of skills that you can try out up until you hit about level 80, because at level 80 you are going to unable to be able to respec for free. So one thing that I want to go ahead and mention that's very important is try out a bunch of the different skills to find out which skill suits you the best, because once you're at 80, in terms of your progression, you're kind of locked into whatever damage type that you're going for, whether that could be lightning, fire, it could be cold, and if you want to go physical, you can go physical. But do you want to do a crit build? Do you want to do a build with ailments? Try out all of these things before you look for pieces of gear that are going to suit your needs. Another thing that is a suggestion is to also look at the trade house and check out all of the legendaries that exist in the game, as you may be able to find a specific legendary that you want to build your character around. So let's go ahead and start off with kind of the gear progression, because this is the whole point of the video, is to make your character stronger, but we'll also briefly going into the crafting in this game and enchanting and making your character stronger. So starting right off, it depends on what your character actually does for damage. Factor that in first and look at the tags that your skill has. So for example, I'm going to be using this as an example, but it could apply to any skill. So since we're playing Erika, we're going to be needing to really focus in on multi-strike, because that's part of her hero traits. You could have a hero trait that focuses on maybe ice and cold if you're doing like Gemma, but split arrow over here has all of these tags. So in order to get your character to become stronger in the game, you're really looking to specifically get things that modify maybe attacks, projectiles. Range is kind of vague here, but for the most part, you're looking for like attack speed versus spell damage, because you want to focus in on one specific type of damage, and anything that can benefit off these, you want to make sure your gear has all these things ticked. So starting right off, in terms of gear progression, obviously you want to get gear that has higher energy. This is something that's kind of different that some people didn't actually know about, because I had a lot of questions before talking about the energy. So you'll see that if I click on this item, it has 30 energy. There are other items in here that may have more energy, and this energy is able to determine how many sockets essentially your skill can actually have. This is the energy that you have. This is how you get your full 6-link setup, if that makes any sense. If you played Path of Exile, you want to make sure your gear has this. Now, once you basically have all of your sockets for your main skill, you may want to work on your other skills as well, as this is also tied to your gear progression, and it's another way you can increase DPS or defenses depending on what you're actually needing to get. But that's another very important thing that a lot of people don't actually know about. But going over your gear and in terms of like what you're looking for. Now, I'm not sure what build you're playing. You may be doing physical damage, you might be doing cold damage. We're doing lightning damage. Now, I do have the ability to convert all of my damage to lightning, so any physical will just go straight into lightning. So in terms of progression, if you are playing any build that does use some of these, there will be some overlap between other builds, but this is a great item that you can get for 1 flame elementium. So we're going to briefly go over the trade market as well. So starting right off, let's go over the basics of what you're trying to do with your character to get more damage and more defenses. So this item, Pendulum of Death, if I want to find out how much it's worth, there's a little hammer here. I can click on it and you can see how much it's actually worth. For the most part, everything is converted into flame elementium for a base price point. This is basically the currency that most people want. The lowest it's going to go is 1, but this item is really good because what you're looking for most of the time, unless you're doing something with spells and you don't have the ability to have your main hand weapon is adding itself to the spell damage, you want to try to look for an item that has relatively high DPS for most attack builds. Spell builds can be a little bit different. You can get added damage to spells as one of the modifiers, but you're looking for a very high number. As much as you can really go for is what you want. And then you have to decide for yourself, well, what kind of damage does my build do? Does it do physical damage? Is it a projectile? Since I convert all of my physical into lightning damage, if it had any flat numbers, like for example on this ring, we have plus physical damage add to attacks. So all of that gets converted into lightning anyway, so whether it rolls physical or lightning, they're both good. Now, there is other modifiers, and if you are doing some sort of conversion, there are ways to get bonus physical damage as extra elemental damage, specifically like lightning would be the one I would be looking for. But this is something that you can actually benefit more off of not getting your main stat, as in since we're doing lightning damage, it's more of a benefit to actually get physical because you can get bonus physical as whatever extra damage, if that makes any sense. So over here with this item, there may be some stats that are completely useless. Now on this item in particular, getting resistances is also very key. As you're going to progress in the game, you'll start noticing as you go up in the Netherrealm in terms of the tier difficulties, you'll notice that things start to hit a little bit harder and they will have more HP. So getting extra elemental penetration could also be really good, or ignoring armor if you're doing like physical. But this item over here, we have projectile damage, so that's going to work with our ability. We're getting extra physical damage, that works with us. Mana, I mean, every build needs mana. And then we also have cast speed. Cast speed is a stat that's like, it could be replaced. The maximum mana, it could be replaced. But the lightning resistance, cold resistance is great, and it has lightning resistance already on it. What you really want to try to do with your character for survivability is really make sure that all of your resistances are at max. Now, you can go past 75, but for the most part, make sure your build at least has 75 in all the resistances. It's going to really help out your progression and upgrading your gear in terms of survivability, because you're going to need a lot more HP versus just getting maxed out resistances. It's going to make your life much easier. But this is just a small ring. It's not really like that great. Here's another ring, and we actually have this green modifier. Now, what's the green modifier? Well, we can actually kind of craft our gear or modify our gear to basically get a stat. Now, the dexterity is a very small thing, but all the rest of the stats minus spell damage are relevant for our build. So we're getting extra resistances, and then physical damage where we can, and projectile damage. That's kind of what we're looking for, but attack speed is another great stat. So looking at my items, there's nothing in particular that I need to mention that's very specific, but for a lot of builds, you'll notice you're going to use a lot of your mana. It's going to be reserved, or sealed in this game is what they call it. You'll see that we have regen mana per second. So another thing that I can recommend for beginner players is this way you don't need to get like a negative sealed reservation like efficiency. So you'll have that 1.5% of mana per second. This is actually kind of nice to have, but it's not something that's like super important for every single build. It depends on what you're playing. But a lot of times you're just really looking for a bunch of resistances on your pieces of gear just to make you a lot more tanky. And we'll show off how to buy these. For boots, you really want to try to get some sort of movement speed on boots, but that's like the only important thing. You'll see a lot of the pieces of gear, it's the same thing. We're getting specifically some sort of damage, right, to either spells or attacks. In this case, this one having a roll bowl. And then we're also looking for life. Crit strike rating, I'm not scaling crit at the moment, but again, it's kind of the same pieces of gear everywhere. You'll see there's lots of attack speed or elemental damage. That's what you're looking to scale to make your character stronger. Now, in terms of using the trade house, and we'll get into the like crafting and the basics of it, because that could be reserved for a whole video. So you'll see over here, I'll move my face out of the way. We have all of these little areas where we can select on the left side. So the very first one over here means that it's a legendary. This one over here is going to be an item that you can completely search out on your own. You can find the base of the item. And then if we go to the advanced section over here, you'll see that there's all these parameters that we can meet. Maybe I'm looking for a very specific item, okay? Maybe I'm looking for, let's say I wanted a weapon, okay? Let's say I wanted a bow, and I wanted to go for the base of the unholy hunting bow, and I could go ahead and search for that. Now, if I want to add certain modifiers, I go to the search criteria, and I'm going to search for things that are relatively common here, so we can just go for, let's say, attack speed. Maybe I'm doing something, well, it's usually going to have a projectile if you're using a bow, right? So these are two good stats on a bow that you may want. I'm just going to hit search. And maybe I only have a certain amount of flame elementium. You can see all the different items here and their price. You can change the highlight of prices. Now, one thing that's very important, if I put flame elementium as the price setting, it's pretty much always going to show up most of the time as flame elementium. The lowest is like going to be 1. But if I go to the price over here, if I want to hit, let's say 5 and put the we'll put the maximum 5. Let's say I only have 5, because earlier on you may only have 5. And if you're wondering how do you get these flame elementiums, you can get them as drops. Usually you want to be at like world tier 5 at least. So if you're not there, don't worry, you'll get there eventually and you'll start getting these as drops. Usually the lower price items will be like 1 through 5, and it's really easy within like a short amount of time. Just do the new league mechanic, and we'll be making a video very soon on how to use the new league mechanic and how it actually works. But basically we'll put 5, we'll hit confirm, but you'll still see that there's a bunch of other ones that are priced here. It doesn't filter all of them out, it still shows you them, but it will highlight. You can see they're kind of grayed out right here, this one that's 10 versus the one that's 5. And you can also go to normal display. Normal display is really helpful because it shows you the amount of damage that it's adding or subtracting. Now the bow that I bought was only 5. The bow I bought was corroded, and it has a very low energy roll. So remember, that's tied to how many sockets you can have in your skills. So that's another way of gear progression. You can get a much better item that has lower energy because it's bad in that sense. Like obviously later we will get upgrades, but we're kind of on the budget here. We're pre-level 80. And before level 80, I recommend you guys to try out all kinds of skills. Earlier on, we were playing with a build using physical, and then I swapped to fire, and now I'm doing lightning. I'm kind of experimenting, and experiment with the skills before level 80, because once you're level 80, you're kind of locked in. You have to use your respec points, because before that, you could just kind of do whatever you want. You can see some of these are going to be less in damage. Now, this isn't always 100% accurate, because it may not factor in all of the things that can be factored in, like the double damage, that can be a very expensive thing to roll on it. But getting double damage and extra projectiles, those can all be really good. In fact, I'm actually scaling knockback because that can add extra damage as well. And some of these may not be factored into the DPS because certain things may not be able to be knocked back, like the little dummy over there. He's kind of locked into the location, so displacement and other things may not be able to be factored in. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your DPS over here, and factor in this number as well. It might not always be 100% accurate. So what I recommend for people to do, it depends on your build, but check out some of the uniques in the game. I think it's a very good thing to look at some of the legendary items. Again, that's going to be this one over here with the little star. So this is like the base, and then this is the other one. You can just click on Trade House, and then you can see all of them. But if you want to search in the parameters, I already showed you how to do that. But if you want to check out all the legends, just click on it and see what it does. I mean, I don't know what build you're playing, but this one is adding a lot of physical damage. That could be good. Hey, we can benefit off of physical. Let's go ahead and check it out. We'll hit search and see how much does it cost. Oh, these are in the hundreds. So this is going to be a very expensive upgrade. So in terms of gearing up, some pieces of gear may be harder to get than others, but pretty much, again, at the moment, most of my gear is basically found on the ground. I bought my bow for, there's one bow that I have that was 1 flame elementium, and then the one that I'm currently using is 5. So my build is very, very, very budget right now. We'll get into more expensive things, but I want this to be friendly enough for people that are brand new to the game to be able to like afford some of the things. So let's go over what you kind of want to do in terms of your skill progression. So pretty much you want to be able to try out lots of different skills. You can click on change over here and check out what other ones do. Now keep in mind, when you get them, they will be able to be leveled up. Right now, if we get a support gem here, we'll be able to get it at level 16, but as we are earlier on, it may be level 15 or 14. It depends on your level in terms of these scaling. But look at all these and see which one's adding more damage. Look at this one. This is 43% more damage. This could be really good for our build. Now, it depends on what you're actually playing that you need to factor this in. Sometimes certain things may not register as more damage because they have to have something to apply. So, for example, this may not count how much extra shock chance that is adding into the actual DPS because we do shock now. But if anyone wanted it just for reference, because a lot of these can overlap with multiple builds, here's what we're personally running over here. And I'm scaling shock, so getting extra ailment damage is quite nice for this. But this is what I'm running personally right now. Just in case anyone wanted to kind of check out what are you running, this is what I'm personally running right now. And we could definitely use a lot more energy, but our weapon, again, I showed you guys how we bought a weapon that has very low energy, but it had just had an insane amount of DPS for 5 on a corroded. A corroded item cannot be corroded again, and it consumes double materials during crafting. So corrosion is something, maybe we can reserve it for another video because there's so many other modifiers, but it is kind of into crafting. So let's go ahead and kind of talk about gearing up your character. So I showed you guys the trade house and kind of what you're looking for. Now, I told you mostly about offensive stats. I also kind of want to briefly go under the defense category briefly. So to sum it up, you have evasion, you have energy shield, as well as you have armor for mitigation. So let's go under the character here, and we can go to the info. So like I said before, you want to try to get your resistances up, and then on top of that, you want to look at the second page will give you more info. You can see our resistances are like overcapped right now, which is totally fine because you can maybe get things that would affect your resistances that would make you go lower. But armor is going to give you physical damage mitigation. Let me move my face out of the way so you guys can see everything. So we have armor for physical mitigation, and if you want, you can run an aura that will grant you extra armor. You can also look at evasion, so you can see my evasion rate over here. So you can either just not take damage or take reduced damage. Those are the kind of the options. There's also block, but in our build, we can't really use block. And then on top of that, you obviously have life. There's energy shield to have extra survivability as well. And there's another form of defenses that's actually not calculated because it has to do with movement speed. Now, when you fight a lot of these bosses, and I'll go ahead and like throw up maybe like a boss in here, I was kind of just showing off how fast this build can actually clear out content. And we can see over here, this is 30 seconds on a boss. I'll go ahead and show you guys some of the bosses. They have like a long intro animation, so I'll start off basically when we're attacking. You can see that this build does pretty good damage. We actually were running a little thing that gives us what's called lucky hit. We can also curse the enemy to make them take more damage, but there's other ways to increase DPS as well. But you can see, watch, once this boss comes into contact, now we're standing on this little like circle because it gives us lucky, which will basically roll our damage twice. It's another way to get an insane amount of DPS. But once the enemy takes enough damage over here by lightning, they're going to be taking negative resistances, and it's going to stack up to 32%. You can see there's the drops. That was just from a monster level 75, as we're just about to hit level 80, so I'm doing more experimentation before we finalize our character here. But feel free to experiment this build if you're wondering, like, you know, kind of how we're playing, because I know a lot of people do want to play Erika. I'm going to briefly show you guys how I kind of play Erika real quick, because if you want to, I'll kind of show you my brief build here, as we still aren't at like level, usually about 85-ish is where you should be able to max out all of your like talent nodes that are really going to benefit, because we still have a massive 55% increased damage, because we pretty much always are going to be multi-striking with this build. And we could go ahead and we'll do like an 85, and I'll show you guys kind of how the DPS looks. Now, one thing that's very important to take into consideration when you are doing any of these little like DPS checks and stuff, make sure that you're looking at the average, not just like the maximum amount. And certain things may not be able to proc in this build. We want to be normally farther away, but that's basically our build at the moment. Now, 2 million isn't really an insane amount of damage. You can get way higher, but again, we're going to be more finalizing that later down the line, and this is in like the budget area right now. But I wanted to go ahead and go over the talents real quick that I personally chose, just in case anyone wants them. I'm just going to go ahead and go over them real fast. As before, we were playing a build where we were using melee. Now, if you want to swap up, sometimes there are overlap skills where, like, for example, this is our extra shock. Now, certain things may completely change up your build, so keep that in mind as well. If you do want to go from like cold to fire or fire to lightning or whatever the case may be. I'm just going over this briefly because some people just may want to use this as a reference, like, oh, what is he playing, right? So now that that's out of the way, I want to go over gearing your character up in a brief introduction to the crafting and enchantment. So there's 3 different things. Let's go ahead and select craft first. So we can take any item over here. Most items in the game will have up to 6 roles. You have 3 prefixes and 3 suffixes. So if I was to take an item over, you can see the green one signifies that we've already like kind of crafted on it. This item over here, let's say I don't really want like bleed or something like that. We can maybe change one of these by using these embers. Now, you see that in the top right, there is an up arrow, and I'll move my face out of the way so you can see all the stats on the item. So you can see that there's an up arrow, and then there is also a down arrow on these little diamond shapes. The up arrow is a prefix, and the bottom one is a suffix. So if I click here, you'll see that it'll affect the suffixes. So these are the affix lists on these embers. If I was to roll them, which one that I could potentially go ahead and swap in and out. Now, these are very expensive. I mean, you'll see that it costs Flame Elementium. So I really recommend you guys to just buy your pieces of gear on the market and just look for whatever whatever you're looking for, and I already showed you guys how to do that. But it's going to be much cheaper in the very beginning. Unless you're crafting some of the best stuff in the game, don't waste your flame elementium. It's really not worth it. I feel like it's a little bit too expensive earlier on. Now this can completely change up some of the items. Yeah, I would really recommend not to go for any of these earlier on, because the item level may not be able to have the right rolls that you want. You probably would have to look all these things up online to see what it could roll off of the base of, let's say, the opal or whatever item level that the item actually is. So this is like a more advanced way to craft. The cheap way to craft, because it doesn't require these embers. Some of these embers can be more expensive than others, but the reason why is because it all is going to be costing you flame elementium, which is an expensive thing. This is like if you really want to craft and get the best of the best. But the other way to kind of craft in the game, we're going to go to the enchant. So the enchant is a very simple way to go ahead and modify our items. You'll see that this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things on this. So if I was to take this item over here, this one is not one that we are actually equipping. You'll see the one that we have equipped, the gear affixes are completely full. But if I was to look at this item right here and say, well, I could get another modifier, right? You can see we've got 2 prefixes and 3 suffixes. I can add another prefix. You can see over here, if I was to select one of these, some of them will be grayed out. And why is it grayed out? I can't select these. It's because there's already 3. And some of these, depending on the rarity of like the roll that you're trying to get, it will cost more. So you can see over in the prefix section over here, what would be a good thing to have? Well, maybe we're scaling armor. I would like to get gear armor. Hey, I could roll this, and it's going to roll anywhere from 63 to 100 gear armor on this. Maybe I want life and gear armor. I could roll this and get plus 29 life on it. But I'm not equipping this item, so I'm not going to go for it. But if I wanted to enchant it, I could enchant it, and then I would have that extra stat on it. So it's a free way to get literally free, extra prefixes or suffixes on the item. Now, depending on what tier that you go for, it will cost flame elementium. That's why it's kind of the gold standard for this game. Now, flame sand is like totally okay to spend, but if you're going to be spending flame elementium, I would recommend, if you're earlier on and the item isn't super good, just go buy it in the auction house, the trade system. It's going to give you a much better result, and you could basically just search for everything that you need, maybe minus 1 stat, and then you can basically enchant it, and you'll have a much better time. It's just going to be overall more efficient. But you can see these pieces of gear, the thing in the green, I crafted some extra life on this. I crafted extra dexterity on this ring, and that's what we did with our items. You can see where it says E, that means it's equipped, but most of these other items, we cannot enchant legendary gear, by the way. Now, there's another system here that I do want to go over, which is the gear empowerment. This is also tied to how powerful your character can be. So if I was to take this item over here, you can see that it's corroded over here. So it cannot be corroded again, and it consumes double materials during crafting. So if I was to select this over here, it's going to cost more crafting material, but this item over here, let me actually select this one just so I can view the stats. So you can see that it only has 30 energy. 30 energy is really low, it's bad, but you can see this item over here only costs 6. This one over here, well, it costs 10. Is it that big of a deal? Not really, because I have a bunch of these, but over time it may add up if we're trying to get a good roll. Let's go ahead and actually use this and make the gear stronger here. So what we're going to do is we can see, let me go ahead and equip this just so we can see it again. So you can see kind of the energy bar. We want to get as much as possible. The more, the better. There's not really a situation where it would be like worse, but let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go and put this in, and we'll go refine it. We got 63. That's not too bad. I want to push it further. I want to try to go for like about 100. Let's see if we can kind of hit that. Maybe we'll get something lower. 50 is not too good. Let's just keep on going. I have a decent amount of this, so 8. That's terrible. 7. That's terrible. And it's just kind of the luck of the draw. Let's see if we can get something good. 84, you know what? I'm not going to risk it. There are certain times where it's like, well, if this was the best item, I would invest everything into it. But it's really not the best item. This is kind of a stepping stone, and that's okay. And so now we have this extra energy. And now with my build, hey, that was actually a cool hit. We can go ahead and go into our skills, and you'll notice we have an extra 80 energy. What else do I want to put more points into for my energy to maybe get extra mana or extra like bonuses on my stats, right? right? Maybe I want my duration, like for example, this one over here. And another way to increase DPS really easy for most builds is going to be in throwing, oh, look at that, just with that upgrade, we got so much off of that. So with this electrocute right now, which is a way where we curse the enemy. Now, a curse is a really excellent way to eliminate bosses faster. So what it does is it's going to give me extra shock chance, and we're going to be able to and make them take additional lightning damage. So I want extended duration because it only lasts 5 seconds, which is not very long. I'm going to, I already have extended duration, so you'll see that we can double up on it. Let's go with the Abysmal Hatred. This is going to make it so the skill radius is reduced, but the curse effect is going to be stronger. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that on. What other things do I maybe want with this? I don't know. Just read the skill and see what it does. Sometimes they'll give you extra numbers, like they'll tell you what they can do in terms of the upgrade. Well, this one we already have. Sometimes you'll actually have to read this and it'll say like, well, we get 23%. Well, what's the base of the thing, right? Well, the base of it is 17.5. So you take that, multiply it, and obviously it's level 16, so we can upgrade it and everything will start to get stronger and stronger. Well, we're going to be starting to go into the multiple millions. Right now, we're in like the baby steps. We're only like, I don't know, 2 to 3 million DPS, which is okay enough. Like we're still able to melt content, what I would consider pretty fast. Most bosses, I'd say under a minute. That's still respectable. And we're doing bosses mostly in about like 30 seconds or under. For the stage bosses, it's like, 5 seconds. But like the other bosses that are like the big bosses, yeah, 30 seconds is totally fine. But we're going to be starting to get more and more damage. You'll notice as you progress, you're going to get stronger and stronger very, very fast, because when you start getting 5% damage when you're in the millions, it's going to add up a lot more. And one thing that we plan to do for this build, and it works with a lot of different builds too, getting these little like blessings is really good. I think it's in Blade Runner. In fact, a lot of people this season are playing Blade Hunter because it's really good. I mean, gaining 1 stack of agility blessing per 8 stacks, or per 8 attacks, giving us 4 stacks of agility blessing. If you play Path of Exile, it's basically a frenzy charge. It is phenomenal. So would be getting 4 stacks of +6, so 6 times 4. Pretty good. You get movement speed, attack speed, and movement speed with Erika is tied to your attack damage, so we're going to be massive amounts of damage. But that's going to be pretty much summing it up, and this is like the very, very basics of it. Now, there's also things with corroding your gear. I won't go too much into that because there's so many modifiers, but this is like the basic introduction to like gear enhancement and upgrades and the brief introduction to crafting for this video. But again, remember, I would really recommend earlier on, before you hit like level like 80 and 90s, a lot of times the pieces of gear that you get will be relatively mediocre. Get the Flame Elementium. Don't try to get gear and then craft on it. It's a waste of Flame Elementium. Go to the trade house. Once you get the best of the best, then start crafting on it. That's my recommendation for most players. But anyways, hopefully this guide and video helped you guys out, and I'll be doing a full build guide if anyone wants a more in-depth guide for this build, as well as more like endgame progression. We'll be dropping that video later down the line. But if you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like on it. If you're new here and you want to see more Torchlight Infinite content, hit subscribe, turn that bell, and for some reason, if you haven't already downloaded Torchlight, there'll be a link in the top of the pinned comment, as this video is sponsored by XD. But I've been playing Torchlight way before they even sponsored me, but big shouts to XD and the Torchlight community for making this video possible. But anyways, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video. Take care. Peace.